Hey guys, Chris here and welcome to The Good Old Gamer. So a couple videos ago, I went ahead and put this video up where I was going over the best components to purchase in this crazy environment that we have with these extremely high RAM and GPU prices, especially here January 2018. And what if you wanted to just get into PC gaming, but you didn't want to spend a fortune to do so, or be taken for a ride by a lot of these vendors out there that basically got their hands on these GPUs and are now scalping people that need them. So in that video, I went ahead and put together the parts that I picked to be the best bang for the buck at this current moment. Now, true to my word, I went ahead and actually picked up most of these components myself. Now, a couple of the components I already had the 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I already had an H61 motherboard. However, I went ahead and put their current prices on the list here to keep things fair. So if you wanted to go out and build yourself a similar system, these are the prices you should be looking at for the equipment today. Now, these prices are all considering secondhand, so you'd have to get these parts off of eBay or some sort of online forum or a swap shop or Craigslist or something like that. So these are not brand new prices. This is for a secondhand system. But if you're looking for a budget gaming machine, basically something just to browse the internet, play some video games, maybe do some homework on, or some basic office work at home, this thing will be more than enough to handle that, and I'm actually using it to record and edit this particular video that you're seeing right here, and it works just fine. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. Okay, so to start off, we went ahead and got the Core i5 3570 non-K. That was about 60 bucks. I had an Asus H61 motherboard laying around. You can still pick one of those up for about $40. I had 8 gigabytes of DDR3 1600. So you can get those for about $40. And I got the Reference GTX 770 2 gigabyte card for about $100. Now those are going for a couple dollars more. That's why I put a little price gap on the bottom there. They are a little bit higher right now, but that should set you back somewhere between $240 and $260, which is great considering the other components you can pick up secondhand, or a lot of this stuff people will give to you for free. Now, the other components aren't really that important, but I was able to get an AZA Cosmos 208 tower for about 20 bucks, an EVGA 600 watt 80 plus bronze PSU. I got that for $25. That was on the Ryzen build I did a few months ago. I kept that around because that was a good deal. PNY 120 gig SATA 3 SSD. Not really necessary if you're just gaming, but if you want the snappier load times of your operating system and your programs, those are about $50, 40 to 50, somewhere in that range. And I have a 2 terabyte Seagate hard drive in here for mass storage. Those are about $60. I actually have 2 of those. I only counted 1 on here. For a gaming build, you're only really going to need 1. And for a decent cooler, I got the Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim, and I got that for $15. That only adds about another $170 if you want to buy those. And those are brand new prices, so you can get those pretty much anywhere at those prices. And that'd bring the total build cost up anywhere between $410, $430, somewhere in that range. Now, the reason why I didn't really harp too much on the case, power supply, cooler, hard drives, and all that is because the prices really haven't been affected that much in this current market. In fact, there's a lot of really good deals going on, so you can get those parts for probably even less right now, or something that's equivalent to them for less, because they're trying to sell parts in a market where people can't afford to build new PCs. So honestly, you can get a really good deal right now. And a lot of that stuff, if you don't want to spend that, there were a lot of comments suggesting that you can get a pre-built system like an old Dell or an HP workstation machine. You can do that as well, and that'll have most of the components there that you need. For a GTX 770, you will need to upgrade your power supply if you do go with a pre-built system, but that'll pretty much encompass the rest of the cooling and everything else that you may need. And that brings costs down even lower. Or a lot of places you can find them for free. There's a lot of recycled shops or PC shops, or maybe you have some friends that just have some basic parts laying around. In reality, you can get away with a 500 gig just old SATA hard drive. That would work just fine to get you started, and you can always upgrade later on. And because this is a locked Core i5 CPU, you can even just use a reference Intel cooler and it will work just fine. It will run a good bit hotter than something like the Be Quiet Rock Slim that I have, but you know, if you're starting off and you're trying to be as budget friendly as possible, that is an option and you can always upgrade that later on. Well, alrighty guys, now the most important part is the benchmarks. How does this perform? Now, I didn't buy a lot of games in 2017, so I don't have the most recent titles available. I didn't feel like buying Battlefront 2. I didn't feel like buying any of the new Call of Duties or Assassin's Creeds. They just didn't interest me, and honestly, I just didn't feel that they were worth investing in. But I do have a few newer ones in there, so a lot of these will look familiar. And in reality, games haven't become too much more demanding over the past couple of years. Pretty much 2015 to current, they're all about the same as far as how demanding that they are. But let's go ahead, roll those benchmarks, and let's see what we're looking at. Now, I wanted to kick this off with Doom. Doom's one of my favorite games in recent years. Always use this game, and not being able to play this would be really, really bad. Now, the Kepler GPUs, as you can see here, we ran both OpenGL and Vulkan, so this way you can see the comparisons. Now, Vulkan does have the higher average frame rate, but OpenGL has the smoother frame times, as you can see on these charts here, and the better 1% and 1% lows. Rise of the Tomb Raider is kind of a similar story, but it's less divergent. We have the higher frame rate on DirectX 12 versus DirectX 11, but it has lower minimums, lower 1% and 0.1% lows. So overall, either experience on Rise of the Tomb Raider is going to be relatively similar, but the Kepler architecture does prefer DirectX 11 and OpenGL over the newer APIs. Next up, we're going to take a look at PUBG. This is one of the biggest titles, and many people out there want to be able to play this game and play it pretty well, especially compared to the fact that the Xbox version of this game just really doesn't work very good. Now, we had to set PUBG to low, but we did average a frame rate of 65 FPS. PUBG is notoriously bad for its frame times, and you can see that here. The 0.1% at 35 frames per second is not too bad, but the 0.1 at 18 frames per second, that's pretty rough. Looking at the frame time chart, it does bounce around a little bit, but it's mostly stable, and the 0.1% lows, they really aren't noticeable. The gameplay experience was very good with this setup. Going over to The Witcher 3, this is a more demanding title. We were only able to average 57 frames per second, but that's close to the 60 that we're trying to shoot for here. 1% low at 33 and 0.1% at 16. So there was a lot of variation looking at the frame time chart. It does bounce around a good bit, but this is also running through Novigrad City, which is one of the more demanding sequences of the game. And this is also running into other component limitations. Witcher 3 is the only title that we did see CPU bottleneck at certain points. Moving over to Mass Effect Andromeda, we averaged 67 frames per second, 1% low of 43, 0.1% at 38. This is a very strong showing. The game is extremely playable. You can see from the frame time graph, this is fantastically fluid, it runs great, and you won't have any problems running this title. And considering this is one of the few 2017 titles that I have, this is actually a really good sign to see that Kepler still has some wind in its sails. Moving over to Battlefield 1, I didn't even bother with the DirectX 12 API because DirectX 11, even on AMD GPUs, runs better. So we know Kepler likes DirectX 11 over DirectX 12 anyway. So if you're going to be playing this game, you're going to want it in DirectX 11 regardless. Battlefield 1 is surprisingly well optimized, so we were able to crank this bad boy up to high, and we averaged 59 frames per second, 1% low at 41, and 0.1% low at 37. So this is a really strong showing, considering you can also tweak the settings to bring that average up even higher and still keep higher fidelity than in a lot of the other titles that we tested. Moving over to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, we were able to average 58 frames per second, 1% low of 50 frames per second, and a 0.1% low of 29 frames per second. So as you can see, the frame times do jump around a little bit. Seems mostly like when it's loading, but it does smooth out for the vast majority of the gameplay. And for the most part, the game does run very well, and it wasn't really perceivable, and it was a good gameplay experience. Well, alrighty guys, we went ahead and tested most of these games at 1080p medium, which for a 2GB card with newer titles, that is to be expected. Battlefield 1 was able to bump up to high, and then PUBG we had to go down to low. So overall, we still averaged out at about medium. Now, most, if not all of the games were really, really close to that magical 60 frame per second average. Frame times overall really weren't a problem. The games ran smooth and fluid, and they presented a very playable and enjoyable experience. Now, this was done with a reference GTX 770, and this card has a lot of room for overclocking. So if you go ahead and even just bump up your GPU core by about 100 megahertz and your RAM by 200 megahertz, that gets you to that 60 frame per second average. And of course, you can also tweak settings, possibly raise some up to high, bring some more down to low. And that can also bring the frame rate back to that stable 60 frame per second average that most of us are looking for. Well, alrighty guys, I hope this really helps some of you out if you're looking to get into PC gaming, or maybe you want to build a second rig for a friend or family member. You don't have to spend a ton of money to get something that will perform well on today's titles. Now, of course, this system is designed to run even better on older titles. So if you're going to be running anything from 2014 on back, this system's going to have no problems whatsoever. This also goes for your big esports games, things like Rocket League or Dota 2. It's not going to have any problems with those whatsoever. So I wanted to show off the AAA titles because they're far more demanding, for the most part, Battlefield 1 being the exception, than those games. Those games are just much easier to run. PUBG is the only one that's not optimized very well, so I wanted to make sure to include that because of how popular it is. But you can get these systems today, right now, for a reasonable price. And this is a lot better option than going out there and spending, you know, $500. In fact, you'd spend more than this entire build on a GTX 1060 or an RX 580 at this point, or even an RX 570. It's pretty crazy. You'd be looking at the GTX 1060 3GB for about the same as this entire build. So performance-wise, yeah, that's going to be faster, but if you just take a GTX 1060 by itself or an RX 570, you can't play anything with that. It just sits there. It'll sit on your desk. So for the same amount of money, you can get a lot more performance here. So hopefully this helps you guys out. If you're interested in helping out the channel, please consider helping me out on Patreon. I'd love to do that budget Ryzen build that I also mentioned in that video with the Ryzen 3 CPU and just a basic B350 board, or maybe a B450 once those come out. I'd love to get that setup going. If you guys want to see something like that, for as little as $1 a month, that can really help me get there. I honestly can't afford all this hardware on my own, so if we want to get there and you would like to see videos like that, I will need your help. If you guys have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this kind of video, please hit that like button, please subscribe, please share with friends. That really helps us out. And I will catch you guys in the next video.